In this video, we're going to be using the dataset posted to the class webpage to allow us to come up with the graphs for population and the rate of change in the population. So I've just downloaded the Excel file. I'm going to enable editing. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click this cell with the filter on it, and that'll let me select the country that I want. So I'm going to do this with my ancestral home country, Bangladesh. I can go through here. I can select multiple countries if I wanted to. I can search for countries, whatever you need. So there we go. So you'll notice they are in 5-year increments. That's just because the rate data is also in 5-year increments, so that's just made it easier to use. So I'm going to select by clicking and holding this set of numbers. I'm going to hit Control C to copy. I'm going to go to one of my buckets here, and I'm going to paste these in the population column, hitting Control V. Easy as that. I also need the birth rate, the death rate, and the net migration rate for this country. So I'm going to go to the rates page down here and select just the country that I want. And this time I need all 3 sets of this data here. So I need to select, click and hold, and make a rectangle here for this entire set. Control C copy, Control V paste, and there we go. So the rate of change for the country is a combination of these 3 pieces of information: the number of people per 1,000 that were born, the number of people per 1,000 that died, and the net migration rate, the number of people who migrated to the country out of 1,000 minus those who left the country. So to combine these numbers, I'm going to go to this cell here, which I've pre-made for the growth rate, and I'm going to define a definition for, or a formula for this cell. This cell is going to be equal to, so just type in equal, the cell that I have here, and that cell is called C2, so I'm going to write C2, that's the birth rate, minus the people who died that year, which is in cell number D2 for this row, plus the net migration rate. So you'll notice this entire column is negative for this country. That's indicating that people are, on the whole, migrating out of the country as opposed to in. So your columns here may have different numbers, so just keep that in mind. So equals C2 minus D2 plus E2. So hit enter. Okay, so that's that number. I don't have to do that every time here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click and hold the small square on the corner of the box. So I'm just going to click and hold that and copy it down the entire column. What it's going to do, what it's going to do is to pre-fill the column with the appropriate numbers for following the pattern that I set in that first row. So if I hover over any one of these cells, you'll notice the formula here is precisely what it should be without me doing it manually. So this is the growth rate for this country. I now need to make a table, a graph for this data. So I'm going to select the year, and then I'm going to hold the control button on the keyboard to select multiple columns. I want the population, and I also want the growth rate. So these 3 were needed to make this number, but ultimately I want this number here. So holding control, selecting those 3 columns, the order matters here, so be sure to select them in that order, starting with the year. Go to the insert menu, and then here you have a variety of charts. I'm going to choose the scatter plot chart, and there's a variety of representations here. If I hover over it, it shows me. I'm going to use this one right here, scatter with smooth lines. Okay, so I have this very not terribly useful y-axis here. You'll notice that these numbers that I'm representing in this column are less than 30, and these numbers are in the hundreds of millions. So to fix this, you can see the orange data here is the growth rate. It's tiny compared to the actual population. To fix this, I'm going to click on one of these data points, and then I'm going to right click. So I clicked normally, and now I'm going to right click and select Format Data Series. This will give me options for how to represent that data. I'm going to choose in this panel here secondary axis. So that'll create a second y-axis over here with the different units. And there we go. So now this represents the change out of 1,000 people on the whole for the growth rate for the country. So this chart is pretty much done. I'm going to give it a proper title, as all charts should have. So this is the country of Bangladesh. It's showing population and the growth rate per 1,000 people. So the population is being shown and the growth rate is being shown over the years 1953 to 2098. Again, those 5-year increments there kind of make this a little bit weird. Not 1950 to 2100, but anyway. And of course, some of these data are projections. So now this chart is ready to be analyzed using some calculus knowledge. So at this point, you would open up a Word document. If you haven't already, Control-C, copy it, and then paste it, and you have it ready-made for some analysis. I recommend also saving the Excel spreadsheet as you go, not just going back and having to remake it every time, because in your analysis you'll have to look at what are some explanations for what happened at a point like this, for instance. Go ahead and paste this before I forget, if it loads. So like this is a strange point where the growth rate suddenly dropped significantly. So notice the 0 line is here. Only in 2060 or so is Bangladesh's population actually going to decrease. So that corresponds to the relative maximum here. So the critical number would be actually closer to 2050, it looks like. But it's this 0 line for the y-axis on this secondary axis. But there is a decline in the rate. So all of these numbers here are positive up until 2050, but there is a decline in the rate. So you've got to do some research as to why, what caused that change. So if I look at the years here, that's probably around the early 1970s. So if I go to those years here, I can see that, oh hey, in the early 1970s, there was a sudden leap in the net migration rate. Notice where it was, and then in 73, boom, it's huge. So that's an explanation for that. I got to do some research into what happened in Bangladesh in 1973, and what you'll find is that was soon after this country's independence, and there was a civil war, and you can see the impact of that here. There's also a cyclone in this time period, so a lot of strife in this country. Anyhow, so you want to make sure you have this data available to look at to explain, okay, so this column changed, but what caused that change? So just pasting that here. The nice thing about this is, even though this is Word, not Excel, I can still click on the data points and see some information about them. It's still reading it as an Excel file and not just a big old picture. But save this as you go, that way you can go back to these. If you change your mind about your country, you can always modify that. You can also change the name of the sheet here for easy access. And that should just about wrap it up.